Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at the third edition of Arf, subtitled Arf Forum. And this time we get a little embossed lettering here, this bleeding logo here, pretty nice. And as we can see, still well-designed stuff. This is another great compendium of rare, lost, crazy comics and art. This cover is by Mike Ludlow. It's a nice good girl painting of a naked woman reading the funnies. And I like how he just makes up these strips. Frederick, Little Sydney. Maybe they were real strips. I don't think so, though. But this is another fun one, guys. I had a great time looking at this last night. It seems like the underlying theme of this issue is just how at one point comics were actually popular, a popular medium. And this is a picture from 1953, and there's just two kids, and this newsstand is just festooned with comic books. And, you know, it was a major thing to sell back then. Almost all the kids in America read comics. Kind of a nice photo. I actually couldn't tell if it was a painting or not, though. I almost thought, is this Norman Rockwell? It's kind of hard to tell. We have this weird little page here. It looks like an eye chart. Comics. Wait, comic reading is fun and mental. Making a little word play on the reading is fundamental. I guess not. Was that even worthy to point out? Sorry. Now we have a little introduction from Cajero, and the initial caps for this were drawn just for this issue by Johnny Ryan. And they're very Johnny Ryan-ish. Very silly and fun. We have an illustration drawn for the author by Booty Rogers. I just can't believe Cajero, like how many people he knew, he met, how much original art he has. I mean, this guy's a treasure trove. Here's a photo of Elvis reading an Archie comic. And other celebrities reading comics. Robert Wagner and Prince Valiant reading the Prince Valiant comic. I believe that's Kirk Allen, the first Superman, reading Superman. Rock Hudson reading the funnies. And it looks like Boris Karloff has abducted this little girl and forced her to a comic rack. And kind of interesting just seeing like comics were part of a mainstream culture back then. And now they're read by like 1% of the population. We have this cover from a 50s horror comic, Beware. And this guy's reading a comic book. His girlfriend's saying, I wish you'd stop reading those fantastic horror stories. And he says, these stories aren't as fantastic as you think. Little does he know that they're not. And look at this crazy monster. It's like a vision from a nightmare. It's very horrific. It doesn't tell us who the artist is. I believe it's, nobody knows. I guess I could look on Grand Comics database to find out, but I'm too lazy. Here's Our Navy magazine, showing that, servicemen were a major market for comic books. Guys in the Army, they bought comics by the truckload. Here's the Elks magazine, and this is a painting by Stan Ekman. As you can see, he's kind of like a bargain basement Norman Rockwell. And he actually painted two covers for the Saturday Evening Post. But I have a feeling he probably did more magazines like this. I mean, he's just a damn fine artist. But back then, there was many guys who did stuff like this. Also, he, just like the front cover, he makes up these comics. Pit and Pat, Tuffy, Flying Pals. I kind of want to read some of these. Yak Yak. And look at this. He predicts underground comics. One of them's comics with an X. This is from 1953. Here's a 1960s Italian magazine, like a general interest magazine, that had an issue talking about the menace of these new violent comic books like Diabolique and Sadic. And he doesn't know who painted this. He doesn't credit it. But it looks like Diabolic is going to kill this woman who's reading all of these Italian fumetti. And now we get a 50s Atlas comic written by Stan Lee and drawn by the great Joe Maneely, The Raving Maniac. And this is a very interesting story. It's almost like Stan Lee just writing a personal comic, not just something that, the kids will like this and Martin Goodman will be satisfied. It seems like he really had something to say here. So this is basically Stan Lee defending comic books. Around this time, of course, many people in America were down on comics and didn't like them. So we see this guy barge into the Atlas offices. He says, I want to talk to your editor. And it's Stan Lee. And he's just ranting and raving about how comics are stupid. How can you sell shit like this? It's kind of weird, though. It's not like he's saying, these are bad for children. He's pointing out just how unrealistic everything is in a comic. Like, here's a story about a vampire and a werewolf. They don't exist. I like this sad zombie. Very forlorn-looking zombie. And basically, Stan Lee is countering him with one-liners and just making fun of him, kind of. But eventually he gets fed up. And look at Stan getting rough with this guy. Throws him down in the chair and says, you're going to listen to me now. Look at the newspapers. Look at these shitty headlines. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. It's good to have some escapism, you know? And the guy's still arguing with him. And then all of a sudden, these two guys from the sanitarium come in and say, look, there he is. And I guess his name's Hubert. And he's an escaped mental patient. And I guess he's just been going around ranting at people. So Stan Lee goes home, and we see him telling his daughter a little bedtime story. Once upon a time, an excited little man barged into an editor's office to complain about some magazines. So very, very interesting comic to be in an Atlas horror comic in the 50s. Very, it seems like Stan Lee really just wanted to get this off his chest. It's almost autobio. Now we have a beautiful, well, they're all beautiful, a beautiful Crazy Cat page by George Harriman, in which it's kind of self-referential. Crazy Cat, somebody drops a newspaper from an airplane, and Crazy Cat starts reading the Crazy Cat comic in the newspaper. And as he's reading it, everything that he's reading happens. So as he's reading it, he's saying, yeah. And then in the next panel, you pick up a brick, Ignatz. And then Officer Pup comes along and runs you off. And then the guy flies back and grabs his newspaper. And Crazy is left all alone saying, well, here I are, all alone with nobody around but myself. This is from 1922. Oh, once again, Craig Yo owns this original. He owns a Crazy Cat original. That's nuts. We have a little cartoon here, paying homage to Crazy Cat by Benito Giacovitti, 1967. Kind of a cute little cartoon. This guy's reading Crazy Cat, and a brick comes out and hits him in the head. And let's skip a page, though. Oh, this is some nice stuff. A trifecta of Jack Davis art. This is an ad from EC Comics. Also kind of, championing comic book reading. Do people laugh at you for reading comic books? His cover to Creepy #1. That's a classic of all these monsters. And look at this rarity. He did it. Well, Jack Davis did so much for everything. I mean, he did like 500 TV guide covers, but this is for True West magazine. Really beautiful drawing. Look at this. This is so good. I think this is like worth the price of admission alone. I would never see this if it wasn't for this Arf. And he's reading a comic book. That's why it's included. Oh, I guess I didn't mention that. Uncle Creepy is reading Creepy to these monsters. A really fun Nancy by Ernie Bushmiller. This is such a dumb joke. Ernie. Nancy is totally immersed in this comic book, and she's not even listening to Aunt Fritzy. She says, "Get out of the house. You've been reading comics all day. Here's your coat. And don't forget your bandana on your head. It's cold." And Nancy, because she's barely listening, she grabs a banana and puts it on her head. And I gotta say, this is such a dumb joke, but I have to admit I chuckled loudly last night when I was reading it. I guess that says a lot about me. This is a 1960 Nancy, by the way. Here's a photo of Ernie Bushmiller reading his own comic, Nancy. And a little Craig Yo illustration, homage to Nancy. This is so odd. It's an ad of these light bulbs. This light bulb company was all like, "This is the right way to read the funny paper, so you don't strain your eyes." Of course, you should also use their light bulbs, because that's the best light. This is very odd. How comic magazine characters are made. He doesn't credit what magazine this was in. It's from 1941, but I believe it was probably in a girly magazine, because it's kind of a fumetti. Many of these panels just take any excuse to have a woman in their lingerie. So I guess this reporter was hired to investigate how comics are made. And here she is doing her research. And of course, she's in lingerie. She goes to the MLJ offices, which became Archie Comics. This is back when they were publishing superheroes. She's interviewing everyone. She really has a crush on all the superheroes. She's like, "Oh, if I could only find a man like that, like Steel Sterling." And this fumetti kind of imagines that all these cartoonists back then actually had models, modeling for the covers and the panels. It's like, yeah, right. And of course, more women in lingerie. There's some kind of crime comic, apparently. And so we get to see all these people from the MLJ offices, which is kind of, I guess, historical in a way. And then at the end, she keeps looking at these hunky drawings of these superheroes, and she sees a wizard character. She says, "Maybe he could make my dreams come true." He's done it. So basically, this wizard made Steel Sterling and the Shield become real, even though they look like drawings. And she's like, "Come on, boys, we're going places." And I think they're going back to her apartment for a three-way, because the whole time she's been drooling over these guys. This kid in an iron lung? They made a special thing just so he could read his comics still? I don't know how he turns the page, though. And this is how popular comics strips were. In 1945, there was a newspaper strike in New York City. Maybe it was everywhere. But people needed their daily fix of comics so much that the mayor went on the radio and every day would read the comics to the people, like narrate them. He did like funny voices and everything too, which I would love to hear. And that's why they named an airport after him. That's LaGuardia. Here's the acknowledgements page. There's nothing interesting here to comment on. Table of contents, we get a little Otto Soglo cartoon from 57. And we start off with the Arf of Bill Holman. Bill Holman is the creator of Smoky Stover. He also created the exclamation "foo," which the Army started using, started calling certain planes Foo Fighters. And of course, that's where the band got their name. And this just has a lot of interesting art from Bill Holman, various cartoons he did over the years. This is a portrait of Holman by Reamer Keller, who we saw last issue, I believe. we saw his cartoons. The initial caps for this article are by George Carlson of Jingle Jangle Comics fame. Or Jingle Jangle Tales, whatever it's called. Some more goofy cartoons from Holman. This is interesting. Smoky Stover had a two-wheeled car. It was a very odd design. This fan made a working model of it. This actually drove. I don't know how that would work without tipping over. Here's Smoky Stover. Once again, an unpublished drawing from the editor's collection. And here we get to see a full Smoky Stover strip. I just love his cartooning. The jokes are just zany as hell. They're kind of goofy, but just tons of puns. He like, it's basically, I'm sure Bill Elder read these as a kid, because he loves just throwing little jokes in the background. There's a king going down a slide. It's a slide ruler. I mean, that's the level of punnery going on here. It's pretty silly. Here's a statue that Craig Yo Studios designed for Dark Horse. Sorry, guys, I spit up on this comic. Damn it, it's not mint anymore. But it looks pretty fun. I wouldn't mind having one of those. And now we get a bunch of strips. And these are just all, you could tell, just the sense of anarchy in these comics. It's just zaniness. I love his style. Some of these I don't even understand the humor. They're just so wacky. There's this two-wheeled car here. And here's a portrait commissioned for this issue of Bill Holman by an artist named Charles Glaubitz. I really doubt he looked like that. That looks like a gray alien. That's just bizarre. Or maybe that's supposed to be Bill Holman down here, and this is just some mutant. He was famous for all these goofy sayings other than foo. He would write in the backgrounds, Nix, 1506 all the time for some reason, and Notary Sojak, which I think became a minor catchphrase back then. I think I read that somewhere. Here's Notary Sojak. God, these puns. Block party. It's a bunch of blocks party. Really fun stuff. So now we have we have an introduction to another comic by Craig Yo. The initial caps for this one page, that's Luke McDonnell of Suicide Squad fame. And he got Stan Lee to write a little introduction. I'm sure Stan Lee didn't write this. I'm sure one of his ghostwriters did. I actually have second-person account of Stan Lee's shenanigans. My brother knew a guy in Hollywood who worked for Stan Lee, for like Stan Lee, that internet company had. And he said that Stan Lee didn't write a damn thing. Even just like little comments and blurbs. And for years it was like that. It wasn't just his experience. All those bullpen bulletins after a certain point, he didn't write shit, but he'd sign his name to it. So we have a portrait by David Cowles, commissioned for this issue of Stan Lee, kind of like that, kind of seems to capture him. And also one of Craig Yo, or Yo. Looks like some kind of monster. And now we get Jungle Comics starring Eddie Fumetti. And this is just a sequential narrative, but it's pretty, just bizarre surrealism. I wasn't that thrilled with this comic. It's just a lot of kind of sophomoric, weird wordplay, and trying to be surreal and weird, but it's just kind of nonsense, to be honest. I still like his cartooning. There's a lot of great panels in this. I love his sense of color. But there's just tons of references to other comics in this. There's like random characters just saying, bank me girl, rank me girl, spank me girl. Like that's what I'm talking about. And then somebody even repeats it later on. Sluggo's bad versus lightning lad. So it's almost like some weird beatnik poem, but it's not that great. I do like this drawing of little little orphan Annie. And her hair and her face are made up of word balloons. And then the word balloons are just floating around her as well. So there's some genuinely like fun, trippy art in here. But as a actual comic story, it's just kind of like, there's a bunch of almost like catchphrases, weird catchphrases thrown together that he made up. National Lampoon Tang. And then we see this little drawing, all rights reversed. Kind of weird that he wastes this whole page on this. Now we have an article called Yabba Dabba Been Done. And this is about, in the early 20th century, there were so many cartoonists who were fascinated and used as their subject matter dinosaurs and cavemen. Because that's when they were discovering, the late 1800s, discovering all these dinosaur bones, reconstructing dinosaurs. It was kind of a fad in America. The caps for this are also by Luke McDonald. Pretty slick. We see a drawing by Frederick Opper of Happy Hooligan fame. And this, I'm not sure who it is, so maybe it's Frederick Opper. And this is basically caveman cartoons from the pre-Flintstone age. So showing that the Flintstones, that whole shtick of having like dinosaurs be beasts of burden and kind of doing the work of machines, that's old hat. These guys have been cartoonists have been doing this since 1900. Here's T.S. Sullivan. He assumes these are mostly from like 1890s to 1910. And the first transcontinental bus, and it's a woolly mammoth pulling all these people in a cart. So as we can see, this is all kind of like Flintstone-y stuff. Really like T.S. Sullivan's drawing. He's a great illustrator. Here we have Frederick Opper doing How the Dinosaurs Went to the Show. And it's just a pretty odd gag. It's so weird, these early comic strips. So many of them, I don't even get the humor. I know this was funny to people at some time, but it's just like, you read them and you're just like, oh, okay. Even some of the Crazy Cat strips, I gotta be honest, I'm just like, it's not really funny at all. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have shown you this. I do like this drawing, though, a lot. This is just really fun, funny, cartoony. Here we have Zim, the cartoonist who did tons of stuff for like the New Yorker and just all the big markets, and more of this caveman humor. And this is an anonymous kind of comic, Prehistoric Charlie. It was published in England probably around 1915. And it's Charlie Chaplin is a caveman, and he's basically he's in love with this woman, and his romantic rival basically is a big bully who tries to kill him, but Charlie beats him up instead, and he gets the girl. Once again, not funny at all. It was so unfunny. It looks like the art in like a Tijuana Bible or something. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. It says A.T. Brown right here. I don't know why he doesn't mention it in the info thing here. This one's nice. This is a guy named Charles Forbell. And we see it, the bus, the first bus. So showing like a triceratops is almost like public transportation. All these people are like sitting on these little, basically hanging off of this dinosaur. Really like his style. I definitely want to see more of this guy. Good stuff. Here's W.J. Enright, 1923. More of the same. Woolly mammoths and cavemen and dinosaurs. Kind of duplicating modern society. This is the first elevator. At the top here we have E.T. Reed. And this comic is called Opening of the Primeval Royal Academy. this year's art, and it's totally ribbing, poking a jab at the Royal Academy of Art. In fact, many of these characters are famous artists of the day who are kind of ensconced in the art scene. And I like these examples of caveman art. Very simple. But man, his illustration's outstanding. Look at these faces on these guys. This guy's pretty amazing. It doesn't give a date, but I'd assume this was turn of the 20th century. Here we have this guy named C.W. Anderson, who I guess was in that very first Arf. This kind of got this weird scratchy style. It's a mammoth being used as a fire engine. The First Joke by H.C. Greening, 1908. A sequential narrative. So it's a nice little comic strip. Just doesn't have panel borders. And this article's pretty amazing. The importance of being Max Ernst. And Max Ernst, the famous painter and sculptor, well, he did all kinds of stuff in the early 20th century. And apparently, in 1934, he published a graphic novel, if you will. He put out 5 little booklets that all told a story, almost like, Franz Mazarel or Lynn Ward, those picture early graphic novels that were just one drawing per page. But he used all collages. And the source of his collage art were these kind of seedy publications at the time in France, kind of like probably the equivalent of pulps, kind of spicy, kind of not proper type reading material. And we have a portrait of Max Ernst done just for this by Aaron Alfie. This is really interesting, this drawing. I mean, I was looking at this for 5 minutes last night. It's just, you can see so much in here. It kind of reminds me of like Steve Bissett and John Totleben and maybe a painter all dropped acid and made this kind of horrific thing. I don't think Max Ernst really looked like that, though. But that's kind of apropos. So here we go. Well, I guess I should tell you the name of this. I'm probably going to butcher it. It's Una Semana de Bonte. And here we go. So this is what each page looked like. He was just cutting up these magazines. This is the main character. Kind of looks like an Easter Island head on this body. This is like early Winston Smith stuff. If you remember that collage artist from the 80s, he did the Dead Kennedys covers and stuff. I really like this character. This main character looks very interesting. Also, the art that he's sourcing for these. Man, I love this kind of art. I can't believe these guys would spend hours drawing all these fucking lines. So this is just an excerpt. These are just various pages from it. So we're not getting the full story. I have a feeling, though, it doesn't really tell a very coherent story. I have a feeling it's just like a surreal, crazy romp. Because it's Max Ernst. But who knows? Maybe it does. That would be kind of fascinating. I like this one. Almost looks like it could be a 50s Atlas character. Also reminds me of like Zardoz, the Zardoz head. So now we have I have a feeling this was just Craig Yo just loves this comic. And it's a 50s funny animal comic called Harry Hotdog. Well, it was just called Hotdog, but it features a character named Harry Hotdog. And he's the creation of George Crenshaw, who is an animation veteran. And he worked at Disney, and but then he did a lot of comic work. Drew Bugs Bunny, Woody Woodpecker. And so he created this hot dog character. And if you look at the shape of his head, he actually points this out. I wouldn't have figured this out on my own. Strangely enough, Harry Hotdog was the model for Scott Shaw's character Hunter S. Toxin, who we've recently seen in not in Cocaine Comics, in Fear and Laughing, and I believe he's in one of the Quacks that we looked at. So this is from 1954. Just a perfect animated funny animal style. Really nice. The story's kind of dopey though. So here we go. Harry Hotdog in Mad, Modern, and Egad. And Harry's trying to decorate his house. His girlfriend comes by. She says, "You need some nice art, Harry. All you have is crap here. All these photos of your family." And she insults his family. She says, "They're all revolting." She throws them out. And she says, "I'm taking you to buy some good art." And she takes him to the modern art shop. So once again, we see a cartoonist jabbing modern art and making fun of it. This one's pretty savage. And Harry does not like it at all. He's like, this modern art is awful. But apparently his girlfriend wears the pants in the family, and she's just like, "You're buying this, you're buying that." And he has to buy this whole stack of expensive paintings. And then he throws them in a garbage truck, which I don't get. He just paid for them. They find him at the city dump. He's got to dig through all the trash. Brings him home. The girlfriend leaves, and she says, "When I come back, I want all these paintings to be hung on your walls." And he finally gets fed up. He's like, "I'm not putting up with this." He's about to burn the paintings, but then he says, "Wait, I got a better idea, where I can actually follow her command to the letter, but I'll get my way." So the girlfriend comes over, and she's like, What's the meaning of this?" And Harry put up all the paintings on the outside walls of his house so he wouldn't have to look at them. And the girlfriend goes off in a huff, and Harry's just laughing. They have such a shitty relationship, these two. I don't know why they're together. It just seems horrible. I would hate to be a fly in the wall at their place. So this next article is really interesting. This is about William Eckren. And he was an artist who drew only 3 covers for comic books in the 50s. That was his sole output to the comic industry. But those 3 covers are just the most bizarre comic covers you've ever seen. We'll get to that in a second. Nobody knew who he was. Even longtime comic pros who worked at the same company as him, like Joe Kubert, for example. He was like, "I don't know anything about him. Sorry. I remember the art." By the way, here's a portrait commissioned for this issue of William Eckren, done by Brendan Danielson. Kind of interesting. And so this author, this is a guest writer, Ken Quattro. And Ken Quattro made it his mission to find out what the hell was up with this guy. And so he did tons of research. For years, he was trying to figure out. He couldn't find anything. And finally, he found an article in the New York Times. And from that, he got a few more clues. And eventually, after many months, maybe even years, he finally found someone who knew him. Oh, by the way, guys, this is one of his covers. You can imagine this is why this guy was so fascinated. Look at this. This is just like, how could this be a comic book cover? What company? Well, it was St. John's, actually. I can't believe the editor was just like, "Yeah, the kids will love this one. Let's put it on the comic and we'll sell a lot of copies." It's incredible. Kind of looks like the work of a schizophrenic. Like all these unnecessary lines. It's just kind of freaky. And so eventually the author tracks down someone who actually knew Eckren. And the weird thing is his name is Eric Larson. Now, the author doesn't mention anything about like, "Oh, comic artist Eric Larson." So I don't know if it's a different guy. It's spelled just like the Savage Dragon's Eric Larson. I don't know. But guys, this is the cover I saw years ago, and I remember being like, no fucking way. This is not a comic book cover from the 50s. This is insane. Look at this. So good. So, here's another one, sorry. This guy's a pretty goofy monster from outer space. So, Eric Larson says that my parents were friends with him. We found out from him that he was of this bohemian artist. Never really sold much. I guess he was a little too weird. And, but seemed like he was a good guy. Kind of a womanizer, though. Always dating different women. And he was from Norway. I forgot to mention that. So then he went to the Norwegian Society of American Citizens and found out even more stuff about his life. He was an art instructor, and that's why these covers came to be. He wasn't making much money, and he was desperate enough to get a little cash from these comic book companies. That was the lowest tier for an artist back then, you know? Maybe being a tattoo artist. Comics were considered just utter dreck. So he really kind of debased himself. But so not only does he get all this information, Eric Larson says, hey, you know what? I have a comic cover that was never published in the basement that he gave my family. And we get to see that. Look at this. I'm pretty sure, and the author's pretty sure, this is a rough. Because, it doesn't have any of that detailed noodling like his other stuff. So this was a rough. He has no idea why it wasn't published. Maybe finally the editor said, what are we doing? We can't keep publishing this guy's covers. Or maybe he pulled it. He doesn't know. The author doesn't know. That's such a find, And here's a drawing of the guy. I'm sorry, a photo of the guy. And so the guy's pretty satisfied that he found out enough about this mysterious artist that nobody knew anything about for decades. Because I've seen those covers reprinted before, at least a couple of them, in articles about crazy comics and stuff. And the oddball comic slideshows. And nobody knew about who the guy actually was until this article. So this is definitely worth the price of admission here. Just seeing the reproductions of those covers. So now we have a thing about Ted Scheel, another unknown illustrator. This is a portrait of him by Matthew Waldron. I didn't mention, guys, this is 2007 this was published. They pretty much were coming out annually. And I think I really don't like graphics in the early to mid 2000s. So much of this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like coming from this kind of cool hip place in art, like the stuff that Robert Williams would champion in Juxtapose. But then also just I don't know, it's icky to me. Even though it's well drawn and everything. So this article, the initial caps are by Ivan Brunetti, made especially for this edition. So this guy, I guess, was a cartoonist, Ted Scheel. He had huge clients, New York Times, the Saturday Review of Literature. But I guess when his career went into the crapper, he had to go to the bottom feeding, bottom rung of cartooning, the Humorama line of jokey, girly cartoon books. They would crank these out, and they didn't really care what they bought. They just had to fill the pages. So Ted Scheel contributed these, which aren't even very sexy. And, I'm looking at them, I'm just like, this isn't very, girly art. But looking at them, it is interesting. This totally looks like, I'm sorry, I should mention, these are, from the 50s. Or maybe even the 40s. But these look like, I don't know, some alternative cartoonist from the 80s or 90s. Just a really interesting style this guy had. Kind of modern. These are all nightmares, like a watch repairer's nightmare, the doctor's nightmare. And they're just kind of weird little, almost surreal cartoons. The baker's nightmare. The photographer's nightmare. Subjects which pose a question usually never question a pose. I don't really understand that, but it sounds kind of profound. I like this one a lot. I'm gonna get some water. I like this one too, The Stockbroker's Nightmare. We see the profits going down and down, tangling up Wall Street. I almost see that Spanish cartoonist Max in here, but for the most part, tons of other artists. But it does not look like old-timey cartoony. It looks very modern to me. Well, modern in the 90s. So now we have the third edition of Cartoonists Go to Hell, and this one focuses on Henry Heath, who does the initial caps as well. He was a guy from like drawing in like the 1800s, early 1800s. So I imagine his stuff would be in newspapers and stuff, and I don't even think Punch magazine was around then. There was humor magazines. But for some reason, he loved to draw all these little devils and demons. Kind of like this cute devil there. And I'm not a big fan of these. I find these kind of dull. Even though, I mean, yeah, look, he's a great drawer. I mean, he draws like a lot of guys from back then. Engraved art or whatever. But it doesn't really thrill me. But as you can see, this guy was pretty obsessed with devils and demons. All kind of humorous. Some of them are very subtle, where it's just a human-looking guy, but there'll be a tail coming out of his coat. It's like, oh, he's a devil in disguise. Just like Elvis sang about when he wasn't reading Archie. Like that weird, wonky face. So yeah, it's nice drawn, but leaves me a little cold. A lot of them are like the devils, like tempting good Christians, tempting them to sin. Here's a parade of devils. And that's it for that one. This guy I liked a lot more. And this is about an Italian cartoonist. I believe he was drawing like in the 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s. His name was Cremos, but that was his pen name. His real name was Niso Ramponi. And yeah, maybe he was even drawing in the 40s. And he was like Italy's most famous good girl artist. And very apropos, they got Dirty Danny Hellman to do the initial caps, especially for this issue. It's always nice to get any art from Dirty Danny. And we have a portrait of him made for this issue by Dean Eagle, who I'm not familiar with, but I like it. It looks good. Here's a photo of him. Here's once again, I have a feeling this is an unpublished cover. Let's see if it says that. And I'm sure Craig Gill owns it somehow. Here's his wife, a drawing of his wife who was the inspiration, his muse. So here's another unpublished drawing. I guess Craig Gill was going to do an Art of Barbie book, and he asked Cremos to contribute. So I guess Cremos lived all the way up until, I don't know, around the 2000s. And unfortunately, he just finished the sketch. And that's it. It looks good, though. Here we go. These are the proper cartoons. So these are all like, none of these are funny, I gotta say. It's all that kind of, you know, sexy Playboy cartoon innuendo humor, and they're just not even close to funny. But man, he draws women so good. He really draws some nice size thighs on these women. All the men are complete bizarro cartoony characters, pretty homely, and all the women are just like fascinatingly beautiful. I really just like his style though overall. Like his cartoony characters are really kind of fun. If he just did comics like with this guy in it, I bet it would be great. But it's awfully nice to have this character in it too. God, this one, look at that. I don't know if it's my imagination just because they're both Italian, but I can almost see like guys like Eduardo Riso. I can almost see like, yeah, he probably grew up looking at these women, and his women kind of have a feel like this. Even though the style is very different. But when I was in Italy, I got a couple of these Italian comics, and all the art was just like, it's almost like all the women look great. Italians really know how to draw women well. This one's a little more sketchier. Not as big a fan of this one. Oh, look at this beautifulness. No American cartoonist drew asses like that. Maybe Frank Frazetta. That's about it. It's very impressive. The physical architecture. Then look how sketchy the stuff in the background is. Like, he doesn't care. He just wants to draw the beautiful woman. And then these things are just like tossed off. Ay, ay, ay. That's pulchritude. Look how repulsive all the guys are. They're just all a bunch of goblins and ogres and cretins. There's Kremos drawing himself. And here's a little pinup. It actually has a dotted line so you can cut it out. And there you go, guys. Arf 3. Arf Forum. Man, I'm really digging these, and I'm really bummed this is the penultimate edition. Next time we look at the 4th issue of Arf. It'll be the last issue, so I'm bummed about that because I've been enjoying the hell out of these. Just all this amazing stuff it's taught me about these cartoonists I'd never heard of before. So I recommend these highly. I think they're all available on eBay and stuff for like less than cover price. So I don't think there's not a market for these as far as, they've gone up in value, even though they're out of print. So hope you guys like looking at it, and I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.